Bullies mocked a white veteran in a diner. Minutes later, Patriot Riders arrived. Morning sunlight spilled through the wide glass windows of Liberty Diner, washing the room in a golden warmth. The clink of silverware mixed with the smell of bacon, eggs, and fresh coffee brewing behind the counter. On the walls, framed photographs of local veterans lined the wood paneling like silent guardians of memory. Red, white, and blue flags hung proudly, their colors bright against the faded wallpaper. This was not just a diner, it was a shrine to community and service. Farmers in dusty boots sat shoulder to shoulder with retirees, sharing stories over steaming mugs. The jukebox in the corner hummed a low tune, an old country ballad about sacrifice and freedom. A Support Our Troops poster, yellowed at the edges, was taped above the register. It wasn't decoration, it was a declaration of values. Liberty Diner wore its patriotism openly, a heartbeat of small-town America. The booths were filled with families, children kicking their legs against vinyl seats, their laughter light and carefree. Waitresses balanced plates of pancakes stacked high, their aprons dotted with stains from years of service. A bell above the door chimed every so often as locals walked in, nodding in greeting. It was the kind of place where strangers became neighbors, and neighbors became family. The air held the comforting rhythm of routine, as though time itself slowed down inside these walls. Outside, the highway stretched endlessly, carrying travelers past, but inside the diner was a pause, a moment of belonging. The chatter was warm, the smells inviting, the atmosphere one of safety. Yet beneath the surface there was an unspoken reverence woven into every detail. The photos of young soldiers in crisp uniforms. The folded flag displayed in a glass case near the counter. The names etched into a plaque for Liberty's fallen sons. The diner wasn't just serving breakfast, it was serving remembrance. For the regulars, it was more than a place to eat. It was where veterans found comfort among those who still remembered their sacrifices. It was where the community reaffirmed its identity, one cup of coffee at a time. The morning carried on as usual, filled with the steady rhythm of plates, footsteps, and voices. But sometimes even the most ordinary mornings conceal the beginnings of extraordinary moments. Outside, the American flag swayed gently on its pole, catching the morning breeze. Its threads were worn, but its meaning was undiminished. People inside hardly noticed. It was so natural to them, like the beating of their own hearts. No one could have guessed how quickly the peace of that morning would shatter, how the diner, a place of warmth, would soon become a stage for cruelty and courage. Liberty Diner stood as a symbol of small-town America that morning, but it would soon bear witness to a story that reminded everyone inside why patriotism, respect, and brotherhood still matter. At a corner booth near the window sat Daniel Carter, 28 years old, his posture upright despite the wheelchair beneath him. His Army service cap rested proudly on his head, the brim shadowing his young but weary eyes. He cut into his pancakes slowly, savoring the small ritual of a warm meal. To anyone watching, he looked calm. To Daniel, each bite carried the weight of memories. The sun caught the silver edge of his cap pin, glinting as though it refused to let his service be forgotten. He was paralyzed from the waist down, a sacrifice he carried with quiet dignity. The scars on his body were invisible under his shirt, but the scars on his spirit were written in the way he moved, the way he observed, the way he seemed older than his years. He listened to the background chatter, the laughter of children, the clatter of plates. It comforted him, grounding him in a normal he sometimes feared he had lost forever. Though his life had changed in Iraq, though he had left pieces of himself on foreign soil, here he was simply Daniel. A man, a neighbor, a patron at the Liberty Diner. He adjusted the position of his wheelchair with one hand, sliding closer to the table. His pancakes were half-eaten, syrup pooling at the edges of his plate. He sipped his coffee slowly, letting its warmth soothe his chest. For a brief moment, peace was his companion. Daniel's uniform was gone, but his values remained stitched into him: honor, duty, sacrifice. He wore them invisibly, though his service cap declared them boldly to anyone who cared to look. It wasn't pride, it was truth. A reminder of who he was and what he had endured. Yet there was also loneliness at his booth. Other veterans often came in pairs or groups, swapping stories. Daniel sat alone, not because he lacked friends, but because sometimes solitude felt easier. He was still learning how to live in this new version of his body, in this new chapter of his life. He glanced out the window at the flag fluttering against the sky, and a flicker of something steadier than loneliness crossed his face. Gratitude, maybe, or resilience. He was still here. That mattered. Mary, the waitress with kind eyes, refilled his coffee with a soft smile. "How are you holding up this morning, Daniel?" she asked. He nodded, answering with a polite, "Doing all right, thanks." It was their ritual exchange, no need for deeper words. Around him the diner continued its hum of routine. But Daniel felt the undercurrent of being different. The wheelchair marked him. The cap reminded others of sacrifice, and sometimes he saw pity in their glances. He didn't want pity. He wanted respect. That quiet breakfast was supposed to be ordinary, another small step toward normalcy. Daniel could not know that within moments his solitude would be shattered. The test of his dignity was about to begin. The bell above the diner door jingled, breaking the calm hum of the morning. 3 young men pushed their way inside, their voices already loud, careless, and sharp. They wore ripped jeans, backward caps, and smirks that carried no respect for the room they entered. Their energy clashed instantly with the diner's quiet dignity. Heads turned from the booths, customers stealing cautious glances. The regulars recognized the type: outsiders, troublemakers, kids who thought rebellion was a badge of honor. Their sneakers squeaked against the floor tiles as they swaggered toward the counter, laughing at jokes no one else found funny. They ordered nothing, not yet. Instead, they let their presence fill the space, like smoke curling into corners. Their eyes roamed the walls, catching on the photographs of local veterans, on the flags, on the framed certificate honoring Liberty's fallen sons. The smirks widened into sneers. "Look at this place," one muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A shrine to old men and their wars." His words hung in the air like a slap. The diner, once warm, shifted subtly into silence. The jukebox's melody seemed suddenly faint, almost ashamed to keep playing. The waitress, Mary, tightened her grip on her tray, her lips pressed into a thin line. The insult had landed, but no one challenged it. Not yet. People stared at their plates, at their cups, waiting for the moment to pass. The 3 young men laughed harder at the silence, emboldened by the crowd's quiet surrender. They shoved each other playfully. daring the world to stop them. One of them kicked at the leg of a chair, the clatter echoing through the room. Then their eyes landed on Daniel. His service cap caught their attention like a target. Their laughter shifted, more pointed now, less random. They nudged each other, exchanging looks that made the room grow colder. "Well, what do we have here?" one of them said, tilting his head mockingly at Daniel. The veteran's wheelchair, his cap, his quiet breakfast. It was all they needed to make him their prey. Daniel lifted his eyes slowly, meeting their gaze with calm restraint. He didn't speak, but his silence was louder than any word. He had faced worse. He had faced war. But the room felt suddenly fragile, every patron holding their breath. In that moment, the diner was no longer simply a place of breakfast. It had become a stage, and Daniel Carter was about to be tested in front of them all. One of the punks stepped closer to Daniel's booth, his grin stretched cruel and wide. "Nice hat," he said, tapping 2 fingers against the brim of his own baseball cap. "Guess it's supposed to mean you're some kind of hero." His tone dripped with mockery, every syllable meant to wound. The others burst into laughter, the sound loud and ugly in the small diner. Their voices carried to every corner, forcing every patron to hear the disrespect. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting to Daniel, then away. No one moved to stop it. "Serving the country's pointless," another chimed in, leaning across Daniel's table. "All that sacrifice, for what? You can't even walk now." He motioned to the wheelchair, his smirk sharp as a blade. The words sliced into Daniel's composure, though his face betrayed little. He set his fork down gently, his hands steady, his eyes fixed on the plate in front of him. Inside, though, shame and anger coiled tight. Mary took a hesitant step forward, her voice small but trembling with courage. "That's enough," she said softly. But the punks turned on her, their laughter rolling louder, mocking her attempt. She faltered, retreating toward the counter. The insults kept coming, each one sharper than the last. "Bet he joined up because he had nothing better to do," one sneered. "Now look at him, broken, useless, just a reminder that patriotism's a joke." Gasps rippled quietly among the patrons, but still no one rose to intervene. The weight of the insults pressed down on the entire room. Liberty Diner, once proud and safe, now felt powerless. Daniel lifted his head just slightly, his eyes steady, his jaw tight. He wanted to speak, to defend not just himself but every veteran's honor, but the words caught in his throat. To lash out would give them victory. To stay silent felt like surrender. His chest tightened as he reached for his coffee, only for one of the punks to slap the cup from his hand. The hot liquid splashed across his lap, searing his skin and staining his shirt. Their laughter exploded once again, crueler than before. The diner went dead silent. Every fork paused midair, every breath held in tension. Daniel sat in the stillness, coffee dripping from his lap, his dignity under attack. The humiliation had begun, and the morning was forever changed. The hot coffee seeped through Daniel's shirt, burning his skin and soaking into his lap. He winced but refused to cry out. His silence only fueled the punks' laughter, their cruelty filling every corner of the diner. For a moment, even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to stop. One of the punks nudged Daniel's wheelchair with his boot, rocking it slightly. The casual disrespect was worse than a shout, worse than a punch. It was mockery meant to strip him of dignity. The other two clapped and laughed as if it were a game. Patrons shifted in their seats, torn between outrage and fear. Mothers pulled their children closer, whispering for them to stay quiet. Fathers clenched their fists under the table, but stayed rooted to their booths. The shame of doing nothing was a heavy silence. Daniel's hand hovered near his service cap, straightening it instinctively. The cap was more than fabric. It was honor, memory, sacrifice. Watching it become a target for ridicule cut deeper than the coffee burn. "Look at him, just sitting there," one punk jeered, circling the booth. "Guess that's all you can do now. Sit and wait." His words dripped with venom, dragging Daniel's injury into the open like a weapon. Another leaned close, so close Daniel could smell the cheap cologne on his shirt. "Did the army forget you? Or did they just throw you away like trash? The cruelty was deliberate, crafted to wound." Daniel's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He thought of his brothers in arms, men who had not come home, men who deserved better than this ridicule. Their memory steadied him, though his heart ached. A teenage boy at a nearby table whispered, "Why won't anyone stop them?" His father shushed him, eyes fixed firmly on his coffee cup. Fear kept them all bound, paralyzed in their seats. The laughter grew louder, echoing against the walls decorated with flags and photographs. The symbols of patriotism stood like silent witnesses, unable to shield Daniel from the storm of insults. Humiliation hung heavy in the air, pressing down like a suffocating fog. Daniel lowered his eyes, not in defeat, but in a quiet act of survival. Yet deep inside, a fire smoldered, one that humiliation could not extinguish. Mary stood behind the counter, her knuckles white around the edge of a tray. Her heart raced as she watched the scene unfold, each insult cutting through her like a blade. She wanted to scream, to chase the punks out herself, but fear held her back. She had worked at Liberty Diner for years, serving countless veterans who wore their caps with quiet pride. To see Daniel mocked so openly felt like a betrayal of everything the diner stood for. Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away. She took a hesitant step toward Daniel's booth, her voice soft but trembling. "Please, stop," she whispered. The punks turned their eyes on her, sneering as though her kindness were weakness. Their laughter rose again, cruel and cutting. One of them leaned toward her. "What are you gonna do, lady? Pour us more coffee?" The others roared with laughter, the sound sharp as glass. Mary froze, her courage shattered under their mockery. Daniel glanced up at her, his eyes filled with both gratitude and sorrow. He saw her pain, her helplessness, and it mirrored his own. In that look they shared a silent understanding. Neither of them deserved this, yet both were trapped by it. The other customers avoided her gaze, unwilling to meet her eyes. She realized she was alone, just as Daniel was. The room was filled with people, yet no one dared to stand for what was right. The silence of the crowd hurt almost as much as the insults themselves. Mary retreated a step, her shoulders slumping. She wanted to protect Daniel, but fear of confrontation rooted her in place. Her kindness was real, but it wasn't enough to stop cruelty this bold. Still, she hovered near, her presence a small shield of humanity. She refilled Daniel's water glass with trembling hands, whispering, "Hold on, please." Her voice cracked, but her intent was strong. She refused to abandon him completely. One of the punks mimicked her tone in a high-pitched mockery, sending his friends into another fit of laughter. The cruelty deepened, staining the air with venom. Mary turned away, her face flushed with shame. The diner felt like a prison of silence. Mary's helplessness embodied the weight pressing on every patron. They all wanted someone to step forward, but no one did. Not yet. The storm had not reached its peak. The heat of the spilled coffee lingered as a dull sting against his skin. Daniel steadied his breathing, counting in fours the way medics taught him. He would not let their laughter decide who he was today. He would not let cruelty define a life built on service. Silence for him was not surrender, it was discipline. He kept his hands folded on the table as if in quiet prayer. The cap's brim shaded his eyes, granting a small refuge. He remembered a dusty road, a medic's voice, a helicopter's rotors. He remembered hands that lifted, voices that refused to quit. Those memories anchored him in the storm of jeers. The wheelchair beneath him felt both companion and challenge. It rolled when nudged, but would not roll him into shame. Metal and rubber were only tools. Dignity lived elsewhere. It lived in the spine of choices he still controlled. It lived in how he faced this moment. The word crippled echoed, then thinned and broke apart. He would not let that word take root in his chest. He repeated the truths that kept him upright inside. Soldier, brother, American. Each word filled the space the insult tried to claim. He lifted his napkin with measured care, pressed it to the stain. The simple action restored a small order to chaos. He would move slowly, calmly, as if time answered to him. Restraint was the last uniform he wore with honor. Every breath was a salute to those who could not breathe. A tremor threaded his fingers, then faded like a passing wind. He fixed his gaze on the coffee's dark puddle on the table. It mirrored the ceiling lights, bright circles in a small night. Even in a spill, light insisted on being seen. He chose that light again and again. He thought of letters he had written to families back home. He thought of the folded flag and a mother's shaking hands. What would those families say to him now? Hold fast, Daniel, stand tall in the way you can. Stand tall in spirit, where the body cannot stand. The punks' voices rose and fell like a crude chorus. He let them become background, like traffic beyond the fields. Noise did not get to be king of this room. Not while the flag still moved in the window breeze. Not while the wall of photos kept their vigil. Shame tried to coil in his chest and choke his breath. He met it with the practice of 1,000 hard days. Count, breathe, remember, choose 4 steps, then repeat. He was more than a target. He was a testimony. He was not alone, even if no one moved yet. He straightened his service cap with 2 careful fingers. He lifted his chin as if answering roll call. Whatever came next, he would meet it with dignity. If help arrived, he would accept it without pride's poison. If it didn't, he would hold the line anyway. Around him the diner's courage sat glued to vinyl seats. Forks hovered, eyes lowered, jaws worked in silent guilt. Mothers wrapped arms around small children's shoulders. Fathers studied coffee as if it held instructions. The room's heartbeat faltered between fear and conscience. An older man in a flannel shirt shifted and then stilled. His wedding ring clicked softly on the tabletop. He glanced at the wall of black and white uniforms. His gaze flicked to Daniel, then fell like a shutter. His silence tasted like rust and regret. Two teenagers at the counter traded uneasy looks. They were learning in real time what courage costs. One's hand tightened on a milkshake, knuckles pale. The other whispered, "We should do something," barely air. Both turned away, swallowed by the hush. A young mother pressed napkins into her purse. She kept her voice calm for the little boy beside her. "Finish your pancakes, honey," she said, too gently. Her eyes brimmed with unshed apology to the room. Her son stared at Daniel's cap, memorizing its shape. A rancher near the door cleared his throat, then didn't stand. His boots had walked fields, not battle lines. He knew right from wrong like weather from sky, but his legs felt heavy with a fear he hated. He chewed it like tough bread and kept sitting. Mary hovered, an island of trembling resolve. She refilled a glass that wasn't empty for something to do. "Please," she whispered to no one and everyone. Her plea drifted like steam above the coffee urns. It fogged and cooled and disappeared. The punks fed on the room's paralysis, growing bolder. Silence to them was permission stamped in red. They stretched, smirked, elbowed each other in triumph. They mistook quiet for consent, fear for agreement. They misunderstood what this room truly honored. The flags did not move but felt louder on the walls. The photos seemed to step forward in their frames. The plaque for Liberty's Fallen flashed like a held breath. Patriotism, though still, was not asleep here. It watched, measuring the room, weighing its moment. A murmur began somewhere near the window. It wasn't a voice. It was a feeling, a gathering, like air before a summer storm, charged and waiting. Eyes started to lift, one table at a time. Something unseen tugged the room toward courage. Then, faint at first, the glass began to tremble. A distant thrum rolled over the highway's edge. The sound thickened, steady as a drum line coming home. Heads turned to the door, to the bright morning beyond. The rumble outside was growing and coming here next. The low vibration reached the diner floor first, a tremor beneath the tables. Coffee cups rattled softly, spoons quivered in saucers. The sound grew, rolling in waves like thunder cresting a hill. Every head turned toward the windows, curiosity replacing silence. The punks paused, laughter caught in their throats. The rumble deepened, steady as a heartbeat multiplied. Engines roared in harmony, chrome and steel proclaiming arrival. Flags whipped in the morning wind, red and blue flashing. Sunlight struck polished handlebars like sudden lightning. It was not noise, it was a declaration. Through the glass, the diner patrons saw them. Motorcycles lined side by side, pulling into the gravel lot. Leather vests, patches glinting, stars and stripes waving high. The sight filled the horizon with strength and unity. It was a wall of steel forged by loyalty. Children pressed their faces to the window in awe. Old veterans leaned forward, eyes shining with recognition. Mary gasped softly, her hand rising to her chest. Hope, long buried under fear, broke the surface. The diner breathed again for the first time. The punks shifted uneasily, trading nervous glances. Their swagger cracked beneath the thunder outside. This was not the audience they had expected. This was not weakness they could exploit. This was something greater than them. Daniel lifted his head toward the sound. His lips parted, not in fear but in wonder. The rhythm of the engines spoke a language he knew. It was the sound of brothers, of comrades returning. It was the sound of belonging. He straightened in his wheelchair, pride stirring. For the first time that morning, the weight eased. Strength was coming, and he could feel it. It wasn't pity, but power rolling toward him. His silence had been heard after all. The rumble grew louder, filling every corner. The walls seemed to vibrate with the force outside. The punks leaned back, their bravado shrinking. Even before the door opened, the balance had shifted. Justice was idling just beyond the glass. The door rattled as the first boots hit the gravel. The engines silenced one by one, leaving a heavy calm. The sudden quiet was louder than the roar had been. The diner sat in suspended breath, waiting for entry. Everyone knew the moment had come. Daniel's fingers brushed his service cap brim. He whispered something no one else heard. "They're here." And with those words, hope stood taller than humiliation. The next beat would break the stalemate of silence. The Patriot Riders had arrived. The bell above the door chimed once, sharp and clear. Then the door swung wide, flooding the diner with daylight. Boots struck tile in rhythm, heavy and sure. Leather vests gleamed with patches of flags and eagles. The air itself seemed to bow in respect. They walked in as one, a line of unbroken strength. Sunlight caught on their sunglasses, their steel chains, their rings. Each man carried not just presence, but history. They were veterans, and they wore it openly. Every eye in the room lifted in awe. Mary's trembling stilled at the sight of them. Her lips parted, a whisper escaping. "Thank God." Patron sat taller, courage rising like a tide. The silent shame of inaction cracked and fell away. The room leaned toward justice without a word. The punks stiffened, their arrogance bleeding thin. One slouched back into his booth, suddenly smaller. Another's smirk faltered, eyes darting for an exit. The third swallowed hard, hands fidgeting against the table. The room no longer belonged to them. Daniel's chest swelled with something fierce and proud. He saw in these riders reflections of his own service. Men who had walked the same ground, borne the same weight. Their presence was not pity, it was kinship. It was the family no insult could erase. The leader of the riders stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, beard flecked with gray. His leather vest bore the American flag across the back. His eyes were steel when they scanned the room. They softened only when they found Daniel. He nodded once, a gesture that spoke volumes. "We see you. We honor you. You're not alone." Daniel felt the message land deep in his chest. For the first time that morning, he smiled faintly. Respect had walked in and taken its seat. The other riders fanned out silently, surrounding booths. Their presence shifted the balance like a rising tide. Every patron sat straighter, prouder, safer. The flags on the walls seemed to glow brighter. The diner was itself again. The punks shrank beneath the riders' shadows. Their laughter had died, replaced by unease. They had mocked a veteran, but now faced a legion. Their bravado cracked under the weight of real courage. Fear gnawed at the edges of their smirks. The leader placed one hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Brother," he said, voice deep and calm, "your family." The words carried more power than any insult. The diner, once broken, now stood whole again, and the confrontation had only just begun. The leader stood centered in the aisle, steady as a flagpole. His gaze swept the room, slow and deliberate, nothing missed. He read the faces, fear, shame, hope, and gathering resolve. He measured the punks' slouches, their shallow, twitching laughs. Then he turned toward Daniel, and everything in him softened. His eyes steel over water-held Daniel's for a beat. A silent salute passed like a folded letter between brothers. In that look he returned something cruelty had tried to steal. Dignity rose, unbent, in the space between two men. A bond older than the morning knit itself tight. He noticed the coffee stain spreading across Daniel's shirt. He noticed the napkin neatly folded, duty in small gestures. He noticed the cap, straightened with careful fingers. War had taught him to see what mattered first. Here the battlefield was a diner floor. He shifted his weight, boots planted like anchors. Behind him the riders formed a quiet line of witness. Their vests carried stories sewn in thread and leather. Patches for units, campaigns, friends, gone home early. The room felt those stories without hearing a word. The leader's chin lifted an inch toward the punks. Not a threat and invitation to accountability. His breathing stayed even, a cadence of discipline. He owned the silence like a seasoned NCO. Calm, controlled, ready to spend no more than needed. He glanced at Mary, and she found her strength again. Her shoulders eased, her eyes steadied on his face. He gave a nod that said, "You did not fail. Fear is not failure. Silence can end here." She nodded back, tears drying into resolve. The regulars straightened, spines remembering themselves. Old habits of respect slid back into place. Hands left coffee cups and found the table's edge. Breaths lengthened, the room's pulse returning. Courage re-entered like a familiar song. The leader returned his attention to Daniel. He touched 2 fingers to his temple in brief salute. "We see you. We stand with you. We're here." The message landed with the weight of home. Daniel's shoulders rose, his eyes brightened. The punks shifted, empty bravado leaking like air. They fidgeted, glances skittering between exits. The leader didn't chase their fear, he framed it. He let them feel the size of what they had mocked. He let the room decide its own temperature. Then he stepped 1 measured pace forward. The floor didn't creak. It complied. His voice had not spoken yet, but it filled the room. Eyes of steel met disrespect and did not blink. Justice stood up, and everyone knew it. His voice arrived low and even, shaped like a command. "Stand up and apologize to this veteran," he said. No shout, no bark, only authority without fray. The words carried through tile, chrome, and glass. They rang like a bell in the bones of the room. 1 punk smirked automatically, a reflex of habit. It faltered when no one laughed with him any more. The second swallowed, Adam's apple jerking hard. The third stared at his hands, picking at a thread. Silence measured them and found them wanting. "You mocked sacrifice you do not understand," he continued. "You spilled coffee. He's carried weight you can't lift. Respect is owed, not asked for, so pay your debt." He let the words land, then left them there. Truth needs no decoration to do its work. Daniel lifted his chin, palms flat on the table. He did not plead. He did not perform. He met the leader's presence with his own. 2 kinds of strength stood shoulder to shoulder. The room learned their difference and their kinship. 1 punk tried a thin laugh that died at birth. "Why should we?" he ventured, voice already shrinking. Because you're in the presence of what you're not, came back. Men who show up when it matters, even in diners. The answer landed like boots after a jump. Chairs scraped as a few patrons finally stood. Not to threaten, simply to witness upright. The room chose its side without a chant. Flags on the wall looked newly stitched. Mary set down a coffee pot like a gavel. "Apologize," the leader said, quiet as a closing door. He had not moved, yet the distance had vanished. The punks now occupied the smallest table in America. Their shoulders rounded, their eyes searched gravel. There was none, only tile and consequence. The first punk muttered, "Sorry," barely a sound. "Louder," said the leader, not unkind, just exact. "Sorry," he repeated, voice finding edges of truth. The second followed, words stumbling over pride. The third's apology trembled but arrived intact. The leader nodded once. Enough and no more. "Now leave," he said. The verdict simple, clean. "Carry this lesson out the door and into your lives." He didn't need an escort. The room itself was escort. The punks rose and found the exit without help. The bell over the door chimed again, softer than before. Outside, motorcycles waited like a line of oaks. Inside, breath returned to ribs that had forgotten how. The confrontation ended without a single shove. Discipline had won where anger might have failed. The punks stumbled into the daylight, their heads bowed. Outside, the motorcycles stood in rows, chrome gleaming like judgment. The engines were silent, but their presence roared louder than words. The punks froze, realizing they were walking through a corridor of flags. Each step out was a step into shame. The riders didn't move, didn't need to. Their stillness was more powerful than fists or threats. Leather vests, patches, and scars spoke for them. The punks had mocked one man, but faced a legion. They slunk past the bikes, stripped of arrogance. Through the diner's window, patrons watched with silent awe. For the first time, courage had taken the room back. Fathers straightened in their seats. Sons and daughters noticed. Mothers felt pride bloom where fear had lived. Liberty Diner breathed as if a weight had lifted. Daniel sat taller, shoulders no longer caved in. He wasn't alone in his suffering anymore. Justice had walked in, not with violence, but with unity. The humiliation that had burned him moments ago was gone. Dignity wrapped itself around him again, steady and firm. The leader of the riders turned from the door. His eyes followed the punks until they vanished down the road. Then he looked back at Daniel, gaze calm and certain. The balance had been restored in the simplest way, respect. Respect reclaimed, respect enforced, respect unbroken. Mary leaned on the counter, tears shining but proud. She wiped her apron across her face, smiling now. Her fear had been real, but so was this moment. The diner, her second home, had remembered itself. Kindness and courage had finally stood side by side. Applause began softly, one pair of hands, then another. It built like a wave, breaking across the booths and tables. Every clap carried gratitude, relief, and pride. Daniel's heart pounded, not from shame, but from honor. He let the sound wash over him, healing the silence. The old rancher by the door tipped his hat. "About time," he muttered, half to himself. He wasn't talking to the riders, he was talking to himself. To every man and woman who had waited too long. Justice had reminded them of their duty, too. Outside, the punks disappeared down the highway, smaller than ever. Inside, the riders filled the empty space they left behind. Strength was not in cruelty, but in brotherhood. That truth settled over everyone like sunlight. Justice had come and justice had stayed. Daniel exhaled, a long, steady breath. His eyes glistened, but his smile was unshaken. The weight he had carried alone no longer felt his alone. The burden had been lifted by the presence of others. For the first time that morning, he was whole. The leader of the riders approached Daniel's booth again. The clatter of dishes and murmurs fell into silence. He removed his leather vest slowly, reverently. The American flag stitched on its back caught the light. Every eye in the diner locked on the gesture. He draped the vest gently across Daniel's shoulders. "Brother," he said, voice deep but kind, "you're one of us." The words struck Daniel harder than any insult ever could. They weren't pity. They were belonging, family, honor. Tears blurred his vision, but his spirit stood tall. Daniel's hand trembled as he touched the leather. It was warm from the rider's body, heavy with meaning. It felt like history, like trust passed from one soldier to another. In that moment he wasn't the wounded man in the corner. He was a veteran, honored and seen. Mary covered her mouth, her eyes shining. She had served him coffee countless times before. But this was a meal of dignity. She wiped at her tears, proud to witness it. Her small acts of kindness had not been in vain. The other riders circled closer, nodding in respect. One clapped Daniel gently on the shoulder. Another set a folded bill on the table, paying his meal. Gestures simple, but woven with unspoken reverence. Daniel received them with humility, overwhelmed but grateful. Applause rose again, but this time it was softer. Not wild, not loud, just steady and true. It was the applause of a community reclaiming its pride. Of ordinary people reminded of extraordinary sacrifice. The diner glowed with a patriot's warmth. Daniel's chest swelled with something brighter than pride. It was gratitude, fierce and humbling all at once. The humiliation had been burned away, replaced by honor. He felt taller, stronger, even in his wheelchair. The vest felt like armor, shielding him with brotherhood. The leader bent low, whispering words meant only for him. "You carried alone what we all should carry together." Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The truth of it sank deep and stayed there. He would never forget this moment. Around him, patrons wiped at their eyes discreetly. A boy near the window whispered, "He's a hero." His mother nodded, pulling him close, her voice proud. "Yes, son. That's what real heroes look like." The lesson etched itself into young memory. The diner, once fractured, was whole again. Flags on the walls seemed brighter, prouder. The air smelled not just of coffee and bacon, but of honor. Daniel Carter was no longer humiliated, he was celebrated. And the riders had made sure of it. The diner was quiet for a long, reverent moment. Then applause returned, steady and sure, filling the room. It wasn't for the riders alone, nor just for Daniel. It was for the spirit of sacrifice that bound them all. Liberty Diner had remembered what it stood for. Daniel's chin lifted, his shoulders square beneath the vest. The humiliation that had once weighed him was gone. In its place burned a new fire honor, belonging, pride. He met the eyes of the crowd, not as a victim, but as a man who had given and been given back. Families looked at him with respect, not pity. Children saw in him a model worth remembering. Old men nodded as though they'd seen this before. Young men sat taller, reminded of what real courage meant. The room itself seemed to breathe deeper. Mary set a plate of pie in front of Daniel, smiling. "On the house," she whispered, voice steady now. Her kindness had not been wasted, justice had answered it. Her diner was once again a place of honor, and she was proud to have played a part. The riders gathered their helmets, ready to leave. But they didn't rush. They moved with solemn grace. Their boots echoed on the tile, steady and sure. Each step was a reminder. Dignity never walks alone. It marches in rhythm with brotherhood. Daniel placed a hand over the vest on his shoulders. The leather was heavy, but it felt like freedom. It told him he was not forgotten, not discarded, that his sacrifice still mattered to his countrymen. And that honor had a way of finding its way home. The leader of the riders paused at the door. He looked back once, eyes resting on Daniel. "As long as patriots ride," he said firmly, "no veteran stands alone." Then he stepped outside into the morning light. The engines roared alive, rolling like thunder once more. Patrons watched through the windows as the bikes pulled out. Chrome and flags flashed against the rising sun. The sound carried with it more than power. It carried reassurance, pride, and a promise that respect for service would not be forgotten. Inside, Daniel remained at his booth, but he was changed, not by pity, but by honor restored, not by silence, but by solidarity made visible. He looked around at the faces, grateful, proud, awake. Patriotism had spoken louder than cruelty. The moral rang clear as the morning bell. Patriotism, honor, and respect for those who served will always triumph over cruelty. Because when one veteran is mocked, all stand with him. And when prejudice tries to speak, brotherhood answers louder. Have you or someone you love ever had to prove people wrong because of prejudice? Tell us in the comments.